Field by field, Maizex is bringing Canadian seed to farmers across Canada. Maizex is your source for high-performance soybeans and grain, silage, and grazing corn hybrids. Visit maizex.com to find your local Maizex representative.
I'm Sean Haney, and this is Realag on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. Realag on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to Realag on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. I'm your host, Sean Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Encourage you to check out RealAgriculture.com for all of your insights and information on what is happening in the world of agriculture. And don't miss out on getting our daily email that goes out to thousands of subscribers across not only Saskatchewan, but all of Canada. You can do that by going to realagriculture.com/subscribe. Okay, today on Realag on the Weekend, we're going to hear from Ian Boxall. He is with APAS. Very concerning news coming out about another processor that is having their grain license revoked. We're going to hear about that from Ian Boxall. We're also going to hear from Ann Wasco, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, get an update on what's happening out there in the cattle markets. It's been an interesting period of volatility for sure, and we're getting very close to the fall run. It's about to ignite and light up as cattle start to come to town. And what does it mean for ranchers and feed yards? And we're also going to talk today about some recent Real Agri Studies market data looking at the impact of carryover inventory from 2023 that you have or don't have on farm, and how that impacts your outlook as we're in 2024 harvest. Some really interesting stuff there that maybe, after you hear what I have to say and break down some of the numbers, maybe you can explain some of the stuff to me. We'll get to that at the back end of today's show. Now, if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the Real Ag feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. You know, last weekend when we had this show, we were talking a lot about the rail strike and how that was really a major concern for grain companies, obviously the railways, the union, farmers, the entire Canadian economy for that matter. As I said, the railways are really that economic underbelly of the Canadian economy. And on Saturday, right around the time of our show, the CRIB made the decision that they were going to agree with the Labor Minister, McKinnon, and they were going to force binding arbitration. And so as of kind of the beginning of the week on Monday, the railways went back to work and have been working very diligently all week, along with the union, to try to get back up to speed. So that former contract was extended, and we're going to binding arbitration. Now, some would, I think from a news cycle standpoint, everybody's sort of like, it's over, we're good. I don't think it's that simple, right? It's not that simple. All week on the Realag Radio podcast, we talked about, are there long-term solutions for Canada? And one of the groups that we talked to was Karen Proud. She's president and CEO of Fertilizer Canada, so I encourage you to check out the Realag Radio podcast and listen to that interview. But also we've got the union now appealing the decision by the CRIB. And reading from a story in the Globe and Mail, the union representing thousands of railroaders has appealed the moves that ended the rail shutdown last week, a work stoppage that halted freight and commuter traffic across the country. In filings to the Federal Court of Appeal, the Teamsters Union challenged directives for binding arbitration issued to a labor board by Federal Labor Minister Stephen McKinnon last week, less than a day after the lockout of 9,300 workers by CN Rail and CPKC. Now, in response to McKinnon's instructions, the Canada Industrial Relations Board ordered the country's two major railways to resume operations. Okay, employees went back to work. As well as the government's directive, the union is also contesting the tribunal's decision. So, Paul Boucher, president of the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference, says the action set a dangerous precedent that threatens workers' constitutional rights to collective bargaining. Boucher continued, Without it, unions lose leverage to negotiate better wages and safer working conditions for all Canadians. The railway companies, along with some industry groups, have said the minister's move ends months of needless uncertainty and subdued supply chain turmoil. CN Rail said arbitration is a neutral process, agnostic to outcome and aimed at breaking an impasse. CN would have preferred a negotiated settlement, according to a CN spokesperson who replied to the Globe Mail by email. So interesting comments there by CN Rail, because so that's, full editorial disclosure here. That's kind of what I've wondered hasn't received enough attention is the fact the idea behind binding arbitration is that both sides park their thoughts. Okay, so they state their case. Think about it from a sports perspective. When players and teams go to arbitration, you really don't know which way it's going to go. And there's an arbitrator that hears the arguments, takes it all into consideration, and then makes a ruling that both parties are bound to. And so binding arbitration is just not necessarily like the arbitrator sides with the railway. They could very well side with the rail workers. And that hasn't been discussed a lot. It's kind of fascinating to me how that part hasn't been covered. And I think, CN mentioning in that article, I think that kind of sticks out to me for sure. One of the things that Karen Proud from Fertilizer Canada had said to me in the middle of the week was the lack of transparency. There hasn't been a lot about, how do they select the arbitrator? What is the process? And how long does this take? And that's something else I think has been kind of missing here. And again, it's one of those things where it's kind of parked in the news cycle a little bit. It's not getting the headlines that it was, say, just 7 short days ago. We know this is that, boy, just shows the importance of moving rail traffic. Less than 24 hours, and the government made a significant move there. So this isn't over, so we got to stay on top of this, especially from a farming perspective, as combines are in the field and crops coming off, and we got grain shipments to make and get some of that product out to the port. There's also incoming there's also fertilizer going out of the country, fertilizer coming into the country. There's goods and services. This is not just an ag thing. This is really an economic thing, sort of a needs thing from just people's way of life. Chlorine for water treatment plants. So I hope that this binding arbitration doesn't take a long time, and both the union and the railway can move on and feel somewhat better about the process. Although it's been a pretty contentious time for both parties, I am sure, out in the open, and for sure, I would imagine, behind closed doors. Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to hear from Ann Wasco with the Gateway Livestock Exchange. We're going to hear about what's going on in the cattle markets when we come back. You're listening to Realag on the Weekend here on 650 CQM and 980 CJME.
Since 2010, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has been helping farmers to grow great wheat. Covering everything from markets, the latest research, pest and disease control, all the way down to on-farm trials, the Wheat School has everything your crop needs. Check out our massive video library on YouTube and grow great wheat with the Wheat School, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
This segment is brought to you by FP Genetics Hybrid Fall Rye, innovative seed genetics for Canadian farmers. Contact your local FP territory manager to discuss your fall seeding strategy and discover Hybrid Fall Rye's flexible end uses for marketing, milling, distilling, ethanol, and feed. Visit hybridfallrye.ca today.
When we think about fall, we definitely think about harvest time. And very true. You've got the harvest dust flying. You can smell it in the air, and hopefully the yields work out. Hopefully they're better than what is expected from what I'm hearing from a lot of farmers out there across the region. What also happens in the fall is the fall run. We got lots to talk about when it comes to the cattle markets right now as well. Let's get into the beef market update with Ann Wasco, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, how are we doing?
I'm good today, Sean. How are you?
Pretty good. Hey, what is going on this week in the cattle
Mm,
markets?
Well, this is the way I guess we end the summer doldrums, if you will. Markets kind of, whether you're talking about cash cattle or wholesale markets, we've had a down week, U.S. and Canada. So start south of the border, down in the south, Kansas, Texas region, steady to one lower. So that's going to be 182 to 183 live. Nebraska 184 live, which is steady, but on their dressed market 292, which is also steady to a buck lower. So we're going to see their 5-area average drift lower again this week. That choice cutout that we talk each week, last night it closed almost $7.50 back of last week, 308.65. And again, the Labor Day buying's done. We're going into September. There's other bills to pay with back to school and reality. And this isn't unnormal to see the cutout drop as we head into September and October. Those are typically kind of our couple of our worst months in terms of that. So that's holding true. And I think that'll be kind of the storyline as we go through the next 30 days. Coming back home here to Western Canada, the dressed market in Alberta was $5 to $7 lower dressed. So 408 to 413 delivered. So you're going to see that Canfax average when it comes out later today. It could be down into the mid 240s now. So, well, and again, remember, it wasn't long ago we were up around 260. So the other thing I just wanted to point out, we've got both Canadian and U.S. steer weights, their carcass weights, sitting at 930 and 931 respectively. Not often we're that close. Canadian weights are 10 pounds over last year, and these U.S. weights are 26 pounds heavier. So we've talked lots this year, Sean, about the heavier carcass weights impacting the overall tonnage, and really that's been a bit of a, especially in the last few months, a bit of a drain on this market as we've gone forward with more cattle, and it doesn't feel like that storyline is going to change for the second half.
And just for our audience, the reason for that increase in the carcass, it's not because packers are behind, is it? It's more feed values have gone down. It's a little bit, what's the word? More economically productive for me to get a little bit longer and get more bang for my buck per unit.
For sure, especially with cost of gains dropping like they have this year versus last year. So it's an economic no-brainer, if you will, for the cattle feeder to put on those extra pounds in terms of what he's getting for the value of that animal versus what it is for his cost of gain. So it's economics driven, and that's why I don't think it's going to change this year. We're going to run with heavy cattle right through the end of 24 and probably into 25 now.
Has that same trend existed for heifer carcass weights?
Yes, and it's across the board. Steers, heifers, and even the cow weights are up a bit, which sounds a little bit funny. But again, you do still have grain-fed cows hitting the market, and the same storyline would fit there. Yeah.
Okay. We also had the Stats Can cattle inventory report come out. What did that tell us?
Yeah. So, as you recall, the USDA skipped their report for budget cutbacks, but we still had a report in Canada for a mid-year report. And no surprises, Sean. Beef cow numbers nationally down another 2% at just shy of 3.5 million head. Alberta, I'll go through some of the provinces for your listeners. Alberta cow herd down 3%, 1.56 million. Saskatchewan was down 2% at 989,000 head of beef cows. Manitoba down 3% at 374,000. Ontario 223,000 down 1%, and BC at 180,000 down 3%. So again, right across the board down. If we think about going back even to 2021's report, and we'll call that kind of pre this phase of drought, our cow numbers in Canada are down 8%. So again, what you feel and see out there is certainly showing up in the data. The numbers might not seem big, but when you keep chipping away at it like we have been, it's adding up. And I guess the other piece that we're really watching closely in this inventory is these beef replacement heifers. Because I always tell folks when we're talking about markets, we can't grow the cow herd until we start to keep some heifers. And we pretty well made the assumption we're not keeping any of the 2023 heifer calf crop. We've seen them on feed all year long. So until we get into the fall run, we'll make some determinations. But this report confirmed that, Sean. So the report said in Canada, replacement heifers, 586,000 head, last year and this year are the two smallest replacement heifer numbers in recent history, like going back pre-1970.
And what reverses that is a sustained positive financial environment. And I don't know how you define sustained, but that's what I keep on hearing from, like when I was at Canadian Beef Industry Conference last week. Yeah, we need more years of this before I sink, I believe it too much is kind of, I'm paraphrasing a bunch of conversations I had, but what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, and I think the list has got a few different reasons on it, and certainly that would be one. Yeah, we've had a couple of good years in here, but that's been it. We're all still, it's been a great year for grass and moisture, but we're all still worried when we listen to Matt Makins and some of the other meteorologists about what's around the next corner with La Nina, the demographic piece. Just that whole competition for land, land use pieces. So we've got lots of challenges in terms of just some profitability for a year or two.
Hey, and I had one listener last week in Saskatoon say to me, "Hey, you're always talking about growing the cow herd. No, thank you. We need these tight supplies to keep these prices so my ranch is economically feasible."
Yeah, and that's a great comment. But from a Canadian perspective, we've got to remember this is a global industry, and globally, we've still got beef supplies growing. So we can talk about what we're going to do in Canada, but we're a pretty small piece of the global beef pie. And so when you've got big production in Brazil and Australia, we're going to be watching for what weather conditions do down there and what happens to their cow herds.
Yeah, well, we always have transitions in agriculture, and as we start to take this 2024 crop out of the field in Canada, the fall run really heats up. It gets super busy at auction marts, trucking companies, feed yards, putting those placements in. Distribution this year, with the drought, we saw a lot of cattle come to market much earlier than we would see in traditional flows. What are we seeing this year?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Sean. A lot happens in the next 3 months, and especially this year because it's been super quiet compared to 23, 22, where we had drought cattle starting to move back in June. Well, that has not been the case this year. It's been what I'm telling folks, more of a normal run, but it feels like we haven't had a normal run for a long time. So what it's going to do instead, over the last few years, we've been spreading that run out starting in June, going right through to December. This year, we're going to get the run from September to November. So it's going to feel like more cattle for sure. But we've certainly concentrated it back to where it usually is. But it's going to be busy, and we've got cattle to place.
And the feed yards, they're still going to have to pay a hefty penny for those feeder?
Yeah, the market, certainly after the futures markets did their correction back in July, and as all markets did, stock markets and all the rest of it, as the worries about U.S. recession bubbled to the surface. Markets have settled back. The deferreds are off, the live cattle contracts, and that has put a little bit of pressure on these feeder cattle, but they're still above a year ago levels, and I anticipate that to continue through the fall run.
Hey, finish up here. You mentioned some of the moisture conditions in the year for grass. How are things looking out there?
Well, again, I can speak for what I see and what and where we live, and certainly it's been one of the better years by far because the moisture was there back in May and June from a timely perspective to grow the grass. Yeah, it's been hot in July, but where I live, it's usually hot and dry in July and August anyways. So grass conditions have been good, and I think that also supports the reason why we haven't seen a pile of cattle move through the last 60 days. So I would suggest the numbers are saying that they've been certainly way better than we've seen. The Environment Canada Drought Monitor says that same thing. So I would argue with the timing that we had moisture this year, grass conditions better in most parts. If you're in the Peace River, of course, that's not applicable, but in most areas it has been true.
Well, Anne, really appreciate you joining us here this week for the Beef Market Update. Have yourself a great weekend.
Okay, thanks, Sean. You too.
When we come back here on Realag on the Weekend, we're going to hear from Ian Boxall of APAS to hear about what exactly is going on with the Grain Commission and Purely. You're listening to Realag on the Weekend here on 980 CGME and 650 CKOM. Realag Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the Realag Issues panel with Kelvin Hefner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern, and don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Protect your anhydrous ammonia and bottom line even if temperatures hit 15 degrees or below. That's not too late to apply agronomically effective, non-corrosive Centuro nitrogen stabilizer. Learn more at centuro.ca.
In order to buy grain in Canada, you have to have a grain license through the Canadian Grain Commission. And we've now got another company that has had that license revoked. And let's hear an interview that Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture did with Ian Boxall with APAS, talking about the latest issue.
I do wish we were meeting under much happier circumstances, but we are not. We did hear just, I guess it was the 28th of August, that we have a fourth grain company, grain handling food ingredient company, that has had its license revoked by the CGC, by the Canadian Grain Commission, and that farmers who are owed money are being told to put in claims. As first the president of APAS, how troubling is this for you to hear?
I think it's very troubling. And I think when it comes to APAS, we've had resolutions over the last number of years that the bond system that currently is in place for producer protection in this maybe needs to be updated and maybe needs to be looked at and modernized, as we've seen several companies over the last number of years had their licenses revoked for non-payment to producers. So it is a huge concern for producers. And I think as the CGC reevaluates its focus on producers, right, on it being producer-focused organization, this is one area where we really need to do they need to do their due diligence to ensure that they have it correct. So in looking at, and Saskatchewan in particular has been quite hard hit by these four companies. Certainly some of them have had branches in Alberta or other provinces, but Global Food Ingredients, LSM Grain, Zegers, and now Purely Canada Foods have all had their licenses revoked. And on so far, at least on the Zegers side, we did receive word from the CGC that $1.2 million had been paid out to farmers. There was enough money there to cover that. But from that perspective, so walk us through, for those who aren't super familiar with how this works, the CGC does require that bond to be put up by these companies so that they can say they're bonded, they have that license. Where does this fall apart for you as far as where the policy is not necessarily meeting the needs potentially? So I think currently under the system, the companies report, the grain buying company would report once a month on what their sales are, what is owed out to producers. Well, they could buy a lot of grain within 30 days. So two questions. Why is sharing of information on how much money they have owing to producers for deliveries, why isn't that more frequently than every 30 days? And why are they even allowed to buy above the bond? Okay, right. Have you asked those questions with any good answer, or those are the questions you want answered? Those are the questions we want answered. Mm-hmm. I also think it's been a number of years since this was even looked at to ever make changes to or any adjustments to. It's probably time. We've asked, the Grain Act review has been in place. Part of that is under the CGC. This falls into exactly what we talked about in our grain summit this winter, early spring. This is what we've talked about for years at APAS, and this is something that it needs to be addressed. And I can speak firsthand because I am currently out just shy $159,000 in change myself by one of these four companies.
So yeah, so that was, I guess, from, there's the APAS perspective, but as you personally, as a farmer, I mean, I don't think anyone is going to say that that's an insignificant amount of money to be out. I mean, that is a lot of money to not be sure whether you're going to see it or not. So personally speaking, with that amount of money, that have you put in a claim for that? Like, where does that sit
So
right now?
I have, and I follow the time, like I got it in on the timeline, and farmers need to be aware that there is some strict timelines on this. And if you miss it, you are out. So ensure that, make sure you get a hold of the CGC. And I just would encourage producers, even if they're unsure, just make the call, find out the process, ensure that you're on the list. Because I also have heard of producers that have missed that 90-day window because we're busy, right? Like, and especially this time of year, we're going into harvest. And this, this is a bad time for this to happen with Purely Canada. But if you are owed money, ensure that you get a hold of the CGC and look after it. So my claim is from March. So I have been out almost $160,000 since March. It's stressful. That's money that I need. Right? The margins in farming aren't good enough that I can just swallow $160,000. So it causes stress, and it causes cash flow issues. And I've had to borrow money to offset that, to put the crop in and do everything I've had to do, right? Because you count on that money coming in. When I sell it, I expect to get paid, as would anybody with any product. So I think we're fortunate that we have a system in place that works, but is it good enough? I don't think it is. So we need it examined. We need some of these questions answered, and we need to modernize it.
Absolutely. So, and that, I guess, that is one of the points, is when your membership, asks questions about this process, about what's happening. Thinking just recently now, we're coming off of this, dual rail strike that thankfully didn't last that long, but that is a disruption to potentially cash flow as well. What is the sense of sort of the ongoing sort of mental stress and financial stress of having to navigate some of these systems that can take months to resolve?
I think lots of times when it comes to some of this stuff, farmers feel like they're running through that football thing where you're getting hit all the time by different issues. There's never anything in agriculture that's easy, and it always feels like we're getting hit with something, whether it be a potential rail strike or this or that. And one of my other concerns with this issue is, as we see these four, it seems to be the specialty market buyers that are having trouble, and I feel for them as well. Okay, I do. But our province, in Saskatchewan especially, we have thrived and succeeded on those niche markets and those specialty crops. And what's going to happen? Am I scared to diversify my operation? Is it going to be wheat and canola because that's easy? Because I know I can haul that to one of the big elevators and get paid. But yet the specialty crops are needed. They're wanted in the world. And we happen to be a huge grower of those. So there's concerns around crop rotation and whether or not this will scare guys away from diversity as well.
Absolutely. I think it's a good point. And certainly, this many companies having licenses revoked in this short amount of time is quite staggering. It does create, I would imagine, a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions for your growers.
Yeah, no, for sure it does. And what does it do to the market? What does it do to the price? If we have four buyers out of the market for some of these specialty crops, what happens to the price? I think we know what happens, right? The price goes down. I think that's, so I think there's concerns on all fronts on this, how it'll affect, crop rotations and what you choose to seed, how it'll, the security that producers feel when they go to seed or when they go to sell grain or when they go to sign a contract. And, when you add this one recently and the fact that they've had issues over a number of years with them canceling contracts. And so this issue has been ongoing with grain contracts and producer protection really to the forefront for the last 3 or 4 years. And it's, having 4 in the first 8 months of this year is very concerning.
Now, you did mention the Grain Act, which is, I feel like it is one of those things that for any of us who are of a certain age, has always been under review. It's just been this ongoing process that never seems to actually get to where it needs to get to. Is that where you see this potentially being addressed in some way, or do you think the CGC has the capacity to potentially make some positive changes with this program, regardless of an overhaul of the Grain Act?
Well, so our understanding is the Grain Act review is done, that the legislation is in there and ready to be brought to the House. So clearly we've missed that window. So I sure in the heck hope that the CGC has the power and the ministry gives them the mandate to examine the bond system, ensure that it's working, and ensure that if it isn't, then give them the authority to make changes so it will work. With input from producer groups like APAS, like CAP in Manitoba, other groups that are involved, and understand it, ensure that we make sure it's right for producers, because I think we need to ensure that the CGC gets back to that. Their priorities is the producer's last line of defense, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, we'll leave it there for now, Ian. We'll keep tabs on what happens in the next little while, and let us know, of course, if APAS ends up with a big breakthrough on this one, because I think there are a lot of producers that would like to see this improve. So thank you so much, Ian, for joining me.
Thank you.
That was Lindsay Smith of Real Agriculture talking to Ian Boxall of APAS. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I've got some analysis for you through our Real Agri Studies platform, the market research arm of Real Agriculture. My partner Justin Funk and I have looked at whether or not you said you have 2023 carryover inventory as of the end of July, and how that impacts your outlook about your current and future farm financial performance and the direction of the markets. Interesting stuff. And there's one point that I want to break down that really surprises me. I think you'll be surprised too. We'll be right back. You're listening to Realag on the Weekend here on 650 CQM and 980 CGME.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
Real Agri Studies is the market research arm of Real Agriculture. My partner and I, Justin Funk, have been doing the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, okay? And you can find those results at realagristudies.com or, of course, at realagriculture.com. And one of the cool things we can do is cross-reference how people feel about their current farm financial performance or future farm financial performance with other questions. And one of the things that's a bit of a dynamic as we enter 2024 harvest is the amount of 2023 carryover that is still out there on farm. Okay, so it's no secret that there's still some 23 crop on farm at the end of July. Okay, some of that old crop won't have moved even as the calendar flips into September here, like now. So I'm not sure that this is uncommon during cycles where the market is in decline over an extended period. But for 3 years prior, the best strategy was to grow and hold, which has been turned upside down on the 2023 crop. And I would say possibly the 24 crop as well. But of course, this marketing regret is in hindsight. It's not entirely, we're not being critical. It's the way it is. But it's important to look at how the amount of 23 crop you are still holding is impacting the financial outlook you have for the farm as 24 harvest is it's underway. Okay. So when we look at the 24 results for the Canadian farmers, the July 24 results for the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index, we asked how much carryover do you have of 23 crop, okay? And you can find all the charts and the breakdown of this if you go to realagriculture.com. So what we know is that 52% of farms in Canada have no 2023 crop on farm. 28% have 10% still left on the farm as of the end of July. This leaves 21% of farms with over 11% of their 23 crop still on farm. Of course, we do not know what percent of the overall volume that represents of the 23 crop, but we know the number, okay, of how many farms have crops still on the farm. So we do know that the Western Canadian farmer is also holding more 23 inventory as of the end of July, but that is also reflected in more capabilities with more farms, on-farm storage to allow for marketing flexibility. That goes back to the history of the Canadian Wheat Board, things like that. When you compare it to farmers in Eastern Canada, 67% of Eastern farmers have zero inventory from 23, while 41% of Western farmers do. Okay, those are the numbers. Here's some takeaways for you. The larger the farm, the more likely you are to have carryover of 23 crop. And the older the farmer, the more likely you have no 23 inventory. But the older the farmer, the more likely you are to have over 11% of your 23 crop. So they're winning on both ends of that argument. So here's some of the takeaways. Okay, this is where we get kind of a little bit surprising. We've dug into who's holding the inventory, okay? How does that impact the outlook or attitudes in the countryside? How much 2023 crop you still have on hand seems to have little impact on how you feel about your current farm financial performance. However, it does show itself when we dig into future farm financial performance. And the fascinating takeaway here is, get ready. The more 2023 inventory you have on farm, the more likely you are to feel better about your future farm financial performance. Meaning, okay, if you are holding 23 inventory today, you are more likely to feel positive about your future farm financial performance, your financial performance 12 months from now, than somebody that has empty bins. I think that's counterintuitive. I really do. I feel that is counterintuitive. So for most people, like I said, this is counterintuitive. So what is driving this belief for farmers with carryover inventory that their financial situation 12 months from now will be better than today? I don't know. I would love your feedback on it. And although more people with 23 inventory feel the market is headed higher, it's not really substantial. So those people with the 23 inventory right now, they're not feeling better about the future financial performance because they think the market's headed higher. It was pretty even. So whether or not you had inventory or not doesn't really impact which direction you think the market's going. There is some differences a little bit when you look at confidence in marketing, okay? But kind of slight. Not that big of a deal. It's pretty even. In any production season, when to market your production is not a simple decision, and how we evaluate that decision and what drives us to move crop can be a very personal one. Everybody's in a different situation. But I do think this is a little bit counterintuitive, and I would appreciate your insights on this. And in terms of, hey, whether you have no inventory, you have 10% of your inventory of 23, or maybe you've got over 4% of Canadian farmers have over 40% of 2023 crop still on farm. Okay, so there's those people out there. And hey, you may have a very good reason for it. I'm not judging. Just that's the reality. I hear from some of our audience in terms of how they feel about this and justifying their position. So maybe you don't need the cash flow. Maybe you're trying to defer tax. Maybe, I can't answer that question for you, but I do think as on the aggregate, some of these results are pretty counterintuitive. You can send me your feedback to my email address, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the Realag feedback line, 855-776-6147. As we head into Labor Day weekend, right? It's Labor Day weekend. This is pretty awesome stuff. It's always an opportunity to, get some harvest done. It's a true Labor Day weekend when we're laboring. But I want to mention to everybody out there that's in the middle of harvest, stay safe out there. And for those of you that are listening to this, maybe you're a bit of more on the urban side of the audience, and you're just interested in agriculture, be patient around some of that farm equipment that's moving down the highway. Don't be in such a rush. Be safe, whether you're driving the equipment or you're trying to pass. Be safe, everybody. And take care. Let's share the road. Too many times we see farm accidents because of impatience and things like that. So just want to get that message out there. Speaking of Labor Day, we got some great CFL games as well this weekend. I know you can enjoy them here on 650 CQM and 980 CGME. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Realag on the weekend, and we'll chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.